All right, guys, welcome to this workshop on Canvas new quizzes. If you are working alongside me today, go ahead and head to canvas.kvcc.edu. You can also access Canvas from the left-hand side of your MyValley. A future note that Canvas does get lots of updates, and it is hard to keep these recordings completely up to date. So if you watch this video recorded, you may see that some of the things I talk about have changed. However, I will try to keep the PowerPoint up to date, and when I add a new slide or change something significant on a slide, then you will be able to find a little gift box hanging out in the corner, and it'll tell you the date that I updated it. That's just to make it easier for you. If you look through the PowerPoint, you should be able to see what has changed since I originally gave this presentation. So, what is this new quizzes thing? Why do we call it new quizzes? So Canvas has what it calls two different quizzing engines. So it has two main ways that students can take a quiz in Canvas and have the grade automatically end up in your grade book. And there used to be one way that we do quizzes, which is still available to you if you would prefer to use it. However, Canvas will be switching over to new quizzes. Possibly July 2021 was when old quizzes was supposed to go away and new quizzes was going to be the only quizzing engine. Now, I don't know if that date still stands. A lot of things kind of got pushed back because of all the campus closures and the whole COVID situation. However, it's good to assume that somewhere around July 2021 is when they're planning on switching everyone over to new quizzes. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So the opposite of new quizzes is called a few different things. You can call it classic quizzes, you can call it old quizzes, you can call it just plain quizzes. So new quizzes is specifically the new type of quizzing in Canvas. You can use new quizzes for not just quizzes, but for tests, for exams, for midterms. Canvas is just going to use that term quizzes for all of these different things. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a true quiz in order for you to use new quizzes. New quizzes just means it's going to end up in your gradebook and your students are going to take it through Canvas. You may sometimes hear new quizzes called quizzes.next. If you ever do any Googling or you look at community posts, especially older ones, new quizzes used to be called quizzes.next. That's just an old name for new quizzes, and they changed the name because they already had new analytics, new gradebook, and then quizzes.next just had a weird different name. So they changed the name to be more in line with their other new tools. I think it's kind of confusing because from now on, just kind of assume when I say that we're going to be starting a new quiz, I mean capital N, capital Q, and not, a new old quiz, or not just an additional quiz, but I'm talking about the new quizzing engine today. It also makes it kind of difficult to Google things. I already mentioned when old quizzes should go away. Quizzes can be migrated from old quizzes to new quizzes. So if you have quizzes already built in old quizzes, if you want to continue building quizzes in old quizzes for now because you found it's more comfortable, or maybe new quizzes doesn't have a feature that you want right now, it is pretty easy to migrate an individual quiz to new quizzes. However, the question banks are a little bit more difficult to migrate. So if you are unsure about which to start with, should I start with classic, should I start with new, then I would just say start with new quizzes unless it really can't do what you need it to do, and keep in mind that you're going to have to move everything over. If you're going to be building lots of question banks, which are called item banks in new quizzes and question banks in old quizzes, if you're going to be building lots of those and really relying on, like, let's say pulling random questions from a question bank, probably start with new quizzes just so you don't have to deal with migrating all of those question banks. New Quizzes is still a work in progress. It is getting closer and closer to being a complete tool every day. If you open up the PowerPoint when I send this, you can click on this link and there is a comparison chart between old quizzes and new quizzes, and it's getting updated as new quizzes gets new features. I think the most recent one that is a major update is that new quizzes now supports Respondus Lockdown Browser, which it did not for a little while, and that was prohibitive for people using it, but now you can use Respondus Lockdown Browser with new quizzes. All right, so in Canvas, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my Canvas course. Let's see, here we go. So here is a sample course that I put together. It should look kind of familiar, something that you might have put together after Canvas Basics and Canvas Level 2. Just a quick plug for those workshops, that this is the kind of course we're going to be learning how to build in those workshops. And for the most part, I teach adding everything to your course through these little module plus signs. So I would have said, if you want to add something to your modules, this is going to be the home page of your course. This is what your students are going to see. So we need to hit this plus sign to add something. New quizzes is different. It's going to be different in a lot of ways, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But new quizzes needs to be added through the quizzes page over here on the left-hand side. So new quizzes on your quizzes page will have a filled in rocket ship. So it'll be a solid green or a solid black rocket ship. Old quizzes or classic quizzes will have an empty rocket ship. It'll just be the outline and it'll be white. So that is how you can tell the difference between old quizzes and new quizzes. And remember that there's a consistent theme in Canvas that if we want to add something, we usually look in the top right corner for a plus sign. And new quizzes will have plus signs as well, just not in the top right corner, but we'll get to that. So top right corner, we're going to click on this plus quiz button. That is going to give us this pop-up, and it is going to offer us a choice between classic quizzes or old quizzes and new quizzes. So for today, we are going to choose new quizzes. It is okay to use both of them at the same time. You will not break your Canvas course if you want to use one old quiz and one new quiz. That's fine for now. Now I'm going to hit the blue submit button at the bottom to save my changes. And that is going to give me a new quiz, and it's going to put me on the settings page. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. I'm going to say my first new quiz. And now I'm going to go ahead and give this a point value. So new quizzes works more similarly to Moodle and differently from old quizzes in that whatever point value I put here is what is going to appear in my gradebook. Now, if you do old quizzes, this is not a thing that exists. It's just going to do math and add up the point values of all your questions. So if you want there to be 100 points in the quiz, you better make sure that, you know, the questions themselves add up to 100 points. New quizzes, just like Moodle, does not do that. The question points are really more like weights, and a 1 point question will be worth twice as much as a half a point question, but whatever you put in this points field is what will appear in your gradebook. It'll do math and it'll force it to be this point value. So if I want to do a 100-point quiz, I'm going to say 100. If you have assignment groups already set up, you can choose them from this drop down where it says assignment group. I have a quizzes assignment group, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Those are like your gradebook categories. Pretty much everything else, you can ignore this allowed attempts. That seems counterintuitive, but this is a new feature specifically for assignments and not really for quizzes. We will be able to limit the attempts from inside the new quiz, and I'll show you what that means in a little bit. But for the most part, you can just ignore this. Okay, I'm going to come down here to where it says assign, and I'm going to put a due date on here, and that's going to be the day that the quiz is due. Let's say September 5th. if you want to limit when students can get into the quiz and when they can no longer take the quiz, you would want to put in the date that you want them to be able to open up the quiz and the date that you want them to no longer be able to take the quiz. This will lock them out entirely, and this should just prevent them from taking it. So they should still be able to see their answers. So once I have finished setting up all of my settings on this page, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to hit save. And when I do a new quiz, it is going to take me right into the new quizzes tool. And that is where I'm going to pause for today. And let's see. If you have any specific questions about how to do a particular question type, we can always address those during the half-an-hour Q&A. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'll let you guys keep working if you are, but I'm going to talk a little bit about something you may run into is that new quizzes are in some ways technically considered assignments. And so why would that be? New quizzes is built on a LTI tool. You don't really have to remember that. You don't have to know what that means. It's a plugin like Panopto is, like your Pearson MyLab or your Cengage MindTap. The result of that is just that the only way Canvas can handle having new quizzes in courses is to do it through assignments. So, because assignments are the only thing that can work with LTIs. And that's also why there's a difference between old quizzes and new quizzes. New quizzes is built on this entirely different plugin technology. So you may notice that when you are adding new quizzes to your modules, it will not appear in the quizzes section. It will appear in the assignments section, which is super duper confusing. It's just a thing that you have to remember. You won't be able to find it under quizzes, and that's also why you can't add new quizzes to your module through the quizzes section. So if there are times when new quizzes behaves kind of more like an assignment, that's why, because technically under the hood in the code, it is an assignment in Canvas. Now, Canvas has tried to do some programming to make that less obvious. For example, it lives on the quizzes page instead of the assignments page, just to help you out. And if you add a new quiz to your module and then refresh, it will get a quizzes icon. So as a side note, remember that everything you put in your modules will automatically end up in these pages on the left. So if I add an assignment or a quiz, it will automatically be added to my assignments page. It will automatically be added to my quizzes page or my discussions if it's a discussion. If it has a point value, it should automatically end up in my gradebook as well. The reverse is not true. So if I add something to my quizzes page, I will have to come back and put them in my modules. So because we have to add quizzes to this quizzes page, which may or may not be visible to students depending on how you set it up, we now need to make sure that we go back and add it to our modules. So I'm going to go back home. My home page is set to my modules page. I've not created a custom home page for this course. And I'm going to go down to, let's say, week 1, and I'm going to hit that plus sign. And the instinct would be to choose quiz, but as I mentioned earlier, new quizzes are assignments and not quizzes. So it's going to be down here in my quizzes category. I'm going to say add item. And the first time when it adds it, it's going to look like an assignment. It's going to have this little assignment icon. If I refresh or leave and come back, it will morph and it'll give you a quiz icon to help you differentiate between new quizzes and your regular assignments. I want to talk a little bit about the things you can navigate around in new quizzes. So we have 4 different pages at the top. We have build, where we're going to be doing the building for our quiz. We have settings, which is going to be where we can set things like time limits or shuffling questions, etc. Reports is where you can do things like an item analysis. And moderate is where you can go and, let's say, give a student extra time on their attempt if they need it. You can also reopen a closed attempt. So that's something that old quizzes cannot do. If a student takes a quiz or submits it accidentally or something like that, and they email you and say, hey, I made a mistake, can you reopen the quiz for me? You can do that from the moderate page. So in new quizzes, one thing I don't want you to get too tripped up by is that because it is a plugin style tool, you no longer have your breadcrumb trail. So there's no back button here that takes me back to my course. You kind of lose that navigation that you normally see when you're inside your Canvas course. Instead, you need to click this return button. Okay, so it's in the top right corner instead of the left corner, and that tends to trip people up. If I need to get back to my class, click on this return button up at the top. It just takes some practice to remember. So what we're going to do is start on the build page, and we're going to build our first question. So we're going to do multiple choice, and remember that in Canvas, we're looking for a plus sign to add something. So I'm going to hit this plus sign. And it's going to give me all of these different options for different question types. New question types that come with new quizzes, I'll cover a little bit later. We've got things like hotspot and stimulus and let's see, ordering are all new to new quizzes, and you can't find them on old quizzes. Today we're just going to be doing multiple choice. I will go into a little bit of detail about the new question types later. So I've added multiple choice. Notice that I can tell what type of question it is because it says it right over here. It's also got the number of the question on the test. So this is question number 1. First thing I'm going to do is give this a question title. Now this is a title that students are not going to see. This is entirely for you so that you have an easier time finding this question in your question bank. So you can put the answer in this question title, that's totally fine. Whatever it is that's going to help you find this question when you need it. In classic quizzes, it was a good idea to say what type of question it was, like multiple choice. In new quizzes, you do not have to do this. They have labeled the question type for you, which is really helpful. So I'm going to say cats. That's going to be the title of my question. Okay, so to add the question stem, I just had to click on it. So if you click on any of these boxes, it will change and it will give you a rich content editor. As a reminder, rich content editor, or RCE, just means a fancy text box where you can do formatting stuff like font or add links or add media such as videos. So I'm going to add my question stem, and that's going to be the question itself. So my question for today, roughly what % of orange cats are male? That's your trivia question for today. So down here, I'm going to enter my answer choices. So I have all of my answer choices in here. The final thing that I need to do for this to be a usable question is I need to remember to select the correct answer. So hopefully everyone has their guess in their head, and the answer is going to be 80%. Now, if I want to give a little bit of extra detail on this question, I can come down here to the bottom, and anywhere you see these little bubbles, little speech bubbles, we've got one down here. We've also got one for each individual answer. Those are feedback. So if you are designing your quiz to be more of a learning experience and less of an assessment, there's kind of sometimes there's a blurry line there, but if you want students to learn from their incorrect answers or just learn things in general, you can give feedback. So I'm going to click on this bubble. And I can give feedback for students who got the answer right. I can give feedback for students who got the answer wrong. maybe like a chapter number or something for them to go back and review. Or I can just give feedback to everybody regardless of how they answered. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to hit done at the bottom, and that is going to save my changes. And there we go. So that is how I have asked a question. Now note that I can add additional answer choices here. So if I need to add another one, I can say 25. I can also delete answer choices. So if I come over here to the right, I can click on this little trash can and it will remove that answer choice. So each question is going to come with a number of options. So, and the options that are available are going to change depending on which question type that you chose. So let's see, for this one we have, you can show a calculator, you can vary the points by answer, so you can give partial credit for some answers, and I can shuffle the answer choices. So shuffling is handy because then you don't have students, whispering or texting each other saying the answer to 1 is A, because 1A will be a different number for everybody. So I can do that and shuffle these choices. Now, occasionally, though, that's problematic because what happens if we have all of the above? Well, I guess that doesn't make sense for this question, so let's say none of the above. We obviously don't want that to get shuffled because if this ends up anywhere except the bottom, then it doesn't make any sense. So what I can do is I can come over here and I can lock this answer so that none of the above will always appear at the bottom, and then these 3 will shuffle randomly. Oh, and finally at the very bottom we have the point value for the question. And remember that I said earlier that that is not a true point value, it's really just a weight. So a 2-point question is going to be worth twice as much as a 1-point question, but unlike classic quizzes, new quizzes is not going to add all those points up. Instead, it is going to be forced into whatever point value you set when you set up the quiz. You can always change that later. I would make your Canvas new quiz point value match whatever is in your syllabus, and then if you have questions that are worth 3 times as much as other questions, you can make them 3 points, and then it'll multiply those by 3 when calculating. Finally, what you want to do is hit the blue button at the bottom that says done, and that is going to save this question. Please do remember to save your questions after you have written them. So I'm going to go ahead and relaunch that poll, and if you have any questions, go ahead and shout them out.
For the point values on the individual questions, if we were to weight a point value higher, say on question 2 than question 1, is there a way that the student sees that on the quiz design, or is that something that we should work into the question itself so that the students are informed of maybe some questions they might want to take a little bit more time on?
That's a good segue into whatever I was going to do next anyway. So, and that is using this preview button. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the preview at the top of the page. And that's going to let me preview this quiz as a student. And there we go, 1 point. And the next thing we are going to talk about are question types. So new quizzes has some new question types that you can use that old quizzes did not. So categorization, so that would be placing items into the correct category. Stimulus or passage, which would be like having one image or one body of text that applies to multiple questions. So rather than having to repeat the same image for 3 different questions, you could have one image with 3 questions attached to it. Hotspot. That one is handy if you're doing a lot with like diagrams or maps. Basically, you upload a picture, you tell Canvas where the correct area is on that picture, and then if students click within that area, then they get full credit. Unfortunately, you can only do 1 click per question, so you cannot have students label multiple spots on a picture. You would have to do multiple hotspot questions in order to do that. Please note that that is the only question in new quizzes that is not accessible for someone who can't use a mouse. So if you have a student who is only able to use their keyboard due to some kind of disability, then, or maybe a broken mouse, then hotspot is the only one that there's no way to make that accessible. Multiple answer with all or nothing grading. I know that this is a big deal for nursing faculty. Multiple answer with the ability to say if students select all of the right answers, but they select any wrong answers, or if they don't select all of the right answers, they will get no credit. So it is all or nothing grading. You also have the option to do partial credit grading. So that is something that old quizzes does not do, and I know that that's important for some of the tests that students are going to take for their credentials later. Ordering, rearranging items in the proper order. Now that sounds kind of cool. I created a cool sample question with putting things in order, putting inventions in order of when they were created, and honestly, I had a really hard time with ordering. I had a really hard time with physically clicking and dragging the items and getting them in the proper order. It was kind of clunky for me. Hopefully they will fix that in future, but it also does not work very well with long lists. So you probably want to limit it to like 3 or 4 items, because if students don't get everything in the exact correct order, they will not get partial credit. Stay tuned to see if that question type improves. I will send you, there's a link at the end of this PowerPoint where you can test out these questions if you are interested. You can actually try these out as a student. So I've included the instructor guides on the rest of the question types with little stars next to the new ones. Like I said, we're not going to cover how to build all of these, but if you have specific questions about wanting to learn about numeric questions or formula questions, for example, please feel free to stick around and ask me during the Q&A, and we can dig into that. Fill in the blank in particular tends to give people, tends to be confusing for people. Item banks. So how do we create what new quizzes calls item banks, what old quizzes called question banks? So why would we use an item bank? What would be the scenarios there? So for example, some scenarios there might be students should get 10 random multiple choice questions and 1 random essay question. You would want to use an item bank for that. For the final exam, I want to pull 5 random questions from each of the weekly chapter quizzes. That would be a reason to use an item bank. You should put all those chapter quizzes questions in their own item banks, and then you can pull from them for the final exam. That's a common one to do. I want to reuse questions on multiple tests in multiple classes, and this is unique to new quizzes. If I update a question, I know I can change it once in the item bank, and all of my classes will get that change automatically. That is the exact opposite of how old quizzes works, where you can put something in a question bank, but unless you link it, which is a specific thing you have to do, if you don't link it, you have to make changes to your question in the quiz and then make the same change again in the question bank. And you have to basically duplicate your efforts, which is kind of annoying. So in new quizzes, that is fixed, because once you put something in the question bank, it forces you to change that question in the item bank from then on, and then it will update on all of your quizzes. So there's 2 options for adding questions to your item bank. If you want to build your quiz first, then you should start here. So I'm going to go ahead and exit this preview. So I have my multiple choice question here, and now I need to edit it. There's a couple different ways to edit, for example, your quiz title, your quiz instructions, and your quiz questions themselves. Remember in Canvas that we had this consistent theme where if we look in the top right corner for a pencil, sometimes it has the word edit next to it. In new quizzes it doesn't, it just has the pencil. You can click on that if you're a fan of consistency. Click on that pencil and it will let you edit this section. So here's where I would put my quiz instructions, for example. However, you have another option in new quizzes, which is simply just click on the question itself. I can always delete a question from up here at the top. So down here at the bottom, we notice that we have this item banking option. I'm going to open that, and I'm going to click the button that says Add to Bank. And what that is going to do, it's going to let me choose. Do I want to add it to an existing item bank that I've already created, or I can create a brand new item bank right now. So, and then I just have to put in the title. For item banks, I highly recommend putting your course number, the test, or the or otherwise the name of the that you want to name the item bank. So if you have a particular chapter or a particular quiz, however you want to differentiate where this question belongs, give that name right here. So this would be like chapter 1. And then also put the question type, and make sure that you put different question types in different item banks. Canvas is not going to force you to do that. It is technically optional. I highly recommend it if you ever think you might pull random questions. And so the reason for that is you don't want students to, if you put all of your questions, regardless of type, into the same question bank. So let's say I create one item bank for my midterm, for example, and I just, I don't differentiate, I just throw them all into the same bank. And then I have essay questions and true false and multiple choice. One student could get all essay questions, and another student could get all multiple choice. Another student could get all true false. And obviously that would not fairly distribute your random questions. So make sure that you are putting different question banks for different question types. It's kind of a pain, but this was pretty much the same thing that you wanted to do in Moodle as well. So I chose my destination bank. I'm actually going to put it in my sample questions bank, and I'm going to say add. And bloop, that has now added this question to my item bank. And notice that now when I try to edit the question, it's grayed out. I can't change any of these things, even if I click on them. And I get this information message that says banked item, some options and point values can be changed here, but editing must take place within the bank. So then I just need to hit this blue button, and it's going to take me away from my quiz and into the item bank itself. And now I can change my question, and edits made here will appear on any assessment using this item. So if I say, change this to say blue cats, that makes no sense, but we're going to change it. And then I say done. That is, boop, notice it has changed over here as well. So pretty much anywhere. Now it says roughly what % of blue cats are male. And I can hit this little X to make this go away. And now it's updated that question on all of my tests. So that was the first way to add questions to your item bank. The second way is, let's say that you do not want to, you don't really want to build a quiz first because you know you're going to be doing all random questions, for example. You just want to build your questions directly in the bank right from the start, and then you don't have to do the extra step of adding them later. So you can do that from Manage Item Banks, and that is available up here in the top right. You have these 3 dots, and 3 dots always means there's options hiding here. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click Manage Item Banks. From here, I can add additional item banks with the plus bank button. I can click on a particular question bank, and then it gives me this plus new button at the top right. I kind of wish this said new question or plus question, but nope, plus new. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to it's going to give me that same menu where I can choose the question type, and then I can fill in my question right here inside the question bank itself. And this is a matching question. When I'm done, I hit done, and then it will just put it in that bank for me. And then I can freely add it to my quizzes from there. So another thing you need to know about your item banks is that they are tied to you at your account, your login, and not your course, and not being a teacher of your course. So if you have an item bank and you have someone co-teaching your class with you, they will not be able to use that item bank to build quizzes in your class. You would need to either build the quiz with questions that are not in an item bank. You would need to just build the questions and not add them to a bank in order for both of you to be able to edit them. Or you can share the item bank with your co-teacher. Now, be careful, because remember that if I make a change inside the item bank, if I'm using that question in multiple classes, it will get updated in multiple classes, and maybe you don't want your co-teacher to be able to do that. So if you're co-teaching, you can always you know, create a quiz that uses questions that are not in a bank, or you can temporarily share that item bank with your co-teacher, or you can just be in charge of building the quizzes. So you can always remove someone's share privileges later, but remember that that does give them the right to change items in your shared bank if you do that. This is very different from classic quizzes where the question banks were tied to your course, I believe. To pull questions from an item bank, you can hit the plus question button, and we are going to, let's do that now. Return. I'm going to hit the plus sign down here. We're going to add a new question. And then I have this little piggy bank icon up here. The piggy bank is your symbol for question banks. So I'm going to click on that. And I have a couple of different options here. If I just want to add one question, one specific question, I can do that. So I can say, let's do the hotspot question. So I'm going to click plus, and that is going to add that specific question. So in this quiz is, where is a squid's brain located? And then I've got a picture of a squid, and you've got to click on where you think the brain is located. So you can see I've got my squid, and then I've got my shape. And so if you click anywhere inside this shape, then that is the correct answer. That is where the squid's brain is located. So that is adding one particular question. If I want to do a random poll, however, let's do that up here at the top. I'm going to add a question at the top of my quiz. I'm going to once again click question bank. I need to use this button right here that says plus all / random. So I'm inside my sample questions question bank. If I need to pick a different one, I'm going to come up here to this little, this is called a breadcrumb trail, where it takes you through the path of everywhere you've been. So I'm going to hit item banks, and that's going to take me back to all of my item banks, and then I can pick a different one. So I could say, oh, I'm actually going to stick with sample questions, because that's the one that actually has questions in it. And then I'm going to hit this plus all / random. So doing that, if I click it, it's going to add all of those questions to my quiz right away. So if I X out of here to close this item bank, you can see it's going to do it in a very condensed and non-cluttered way, which is nice. So you can see questions 1 through 7 are now all of the questions from my sample questions item bank with 1 point per question. However, if I want this to be not all of my questions, but just a number of random questions, I'm going to click on this to edit it. And then I'm going to say, instead of use all the questions, I'm going to say randomly select questions. And now I can pick the number that I want to use. So I'm going to say, ideally, I mean, you want to have a much lower number than is available in your bank. So if I try to go too high, it'll stop me. It'll say max number exceeded, because the bank only contains 7 questions. So if I want random questions, this is really only going to be effective if I do something like 3. Or 2. Ideally, you would want a question bank with lots and lots and lots of different potential questions, so that no 2 students are going to get the same quiz. Also, if you're going to have students do multiple attempts, it can be a good idea to give them random questions so that when they retake it, they are not retaking the exact same test, especially in a skills-based class. Giving them different questions to test out their skills is usually a good idea. So I'm going to say done. And there we go. So now I've got 2 questions pulled randomly from the bank sample questions. If I need to change that question bank, I can once again click on this to edit it, or once again I can click the pencil and I can change my item bank right from here. So I can say multiple choice instead, and then that's not going to work because I don't have any questions in there, but you can change the bank right from within the question itself. So, oh, something else I forgot to talk about is how to rearrange these questions. So notice that we have these 8 dots right here on the right-hand side. In many other places in Canvas, it's on the left side, but here it's on the right. You can use that to click and drag and rearrange your questions. Now, once again, I think the click and drag in new quizzes is a little cumbersome and clunky. You can also do a single click and just say move down to rearrange things, or you can say move to bottom and it'll rearrange those. I think that's an easier way to do it. When students have click and drag answers, such as categorization, they can also do the same thing. They can just click on it and they can pick an option from the list so that they don't have to deal with the click and drag awkwardness that occurs. You can also get a bird's eye view of all of your quiz questions over here on the left. So notice I've got 1 through 2, 3, and 4. I can pop this out and see here are my questions, and I can actually rearrange them from here as well, which might be a little bit easier. So I've got number 1, this is a hotspot question, 2 through 3 are sample questions, and 4 is my cats question. I can also pop that closed, and so this is just a quick way to navigate through your quiz. So next we're going to talk about settings and moderating. So the moderate page is what you're going to use to view a student's attempt. You can regrade individual questions. Let's say that you noticed that you wrote a bad question, happens to all of us. You can go in and you can edit the question by regrading it. And so basically you'll go in here and you'll pick maybe you had the wrong answer selected as the right answer, for example. That's an easy one to do. Or, you know, maybe you just made some other kind of typo or mistake, or you just think it was a bad question. The way you wrote it was confusing, or students didn't get it, or whatever. It's really common to need to go in and regrade a question, and then it will much more easily than classic quizzes. Classic quizzes, trying to change questions after students have taken it in classic quizzes tends to create a lot of kerfluffles. It's very confusing, and Canvas does not grade in an intuitive way, and it's like, you know, dropping a ball of string and having to untangle it. It can be difficult. So I really like new quizzes for regrading questions that maybe you don't want to give, you don't want to count against your students. View the quiz log. So in old quizzes, this included when students navigated away from the test. So if they changed the window and navigated away from your quiz to check their Facebook or to go to Google or something, it would tell you that they were no longer looking at the quiz screen for more than 15 or 30 seconds. I heard that mixed reviews as to how accurate that was anyway, but I tested it, and new quizzes does not seem to have that ability. So for security things, I still highly recommend using Respondus Lockdown Browser. You can give students extra time or attempts on just this one quiz or on all of their quizzes at once. This is a new quizzes feature that's really handy, because oftentimes if you get a letter from Lois in the Office of Student Access that a student needs extra time on all of their tests, it's nice to be able to put that in as an accommodation, and then it will apply to all of their tests. You don't have to do it individually each time. And then I've got the guide page for how to use the moderate page. Settings. So Here are a couple of, if we go to the settings page, we'll see things like shuffling questions, shuffling answers, one question at a time. So here are some of my recommendations for this page. Allowing one question at a time is usually good practice, and it helps minimize if a student is timed out in the background, for example. Perhaps maybe they were in the middle of writing an essay question or something. This will help minimize them losing work if they're logged out in the background. It also, I've heard, helps prevent students from feeling overwhelmed by having 20 questions on one page. If you turn off backtracking, make sure you're very clear to your students that once they go past a question, that's it. They cannot go back. So a lot of students might be used to freely navigating quizzes. I'm definitely guilty of, on question 15, I see the answers and I go, oh, this tells me the answer to question 1, and I go back and I mark things. If you turn off backtracking, they can't do that. They get one shot at the question, they answer it, or not, and then that's it. Require an access code. This isn't really something that you would give your students. So if you set a password on your test, the more effective reason to use that is if you are limiting your test to be taken at the testing center. Now, quick disclaimer, please don't, even if you're going to be having your students on campus, please don't just for security say my students have to take all of their tests in the testing center because I want them to be proctored. Even before COVID, the testing center didn't like you doing that. They were super duper overwhelmed all the time anyway, especially because everyone tends to do their tests at the exact same time. Everyone does midterms, everyone does finals for the most part. So they would get super overwhelmed even in normal times. So please don't, just for the sake of wanting the security, just say all of my students have to take the test in the testing center, unless I'm not even sure what their policies are for this semester. So definitely get in contact with them if that is something that you need to use. So basically you would put a password on your test and then give the password to testing center staff, and then they would keep that secret and they would enter the password, and that makes sure that only testing center staff are able to access the quiz for your students. Multiple attempts. So new quizzes, if you let students take a quiz more than once, you can now enforce a waiting period before students can re-attempt that quiz, which is really handy because sometimes you give multiple attempts, student does it once, does terrible, they immediately retake it, they do terrible. If you want to enforce that they have to go and study and review and think about what they've done instead of, giving into the impulse to just want to be done with it, then, you can enforce a waiting period of a couple days, a couple hours, whatever. Restricting students from viewing their results. So this is something that we've run into, is that there doesn't seem to be a way to only let students see their results immediately after their final attempt. So if they have multiple attempts and you let them see their answers, they're gonna see their answers after their first attempt. And so what you would need to do for now is manually go, keep everything hidden if you want to, and then manually decide, maybe after the quiz is closed, I'm going to go in and I'm going to release the answers to my students. So if you say show points, that is going to show them their grade. If you want to show how many points were possible on the test, say show points possible. I'm not sure why you would want to keep that unchecked if you're going to check the first one. If anyone has any ideas, let me know. Students won't be able to see their quiz questions though, so they won't be able to see the test itself unless you check show items and questions. Keeping that unchecked is a good idea for anyone who is worried about having their test questions uploaded online to cheating question banks, which is a thing. We have had some instructors kind of not know that that's a thing and get a nasty surprise when they found their tests floating around on the internet. So if that's something that concerns you, then you can just keep that unchecked, and then students won't be able to see the quiz after they take it. After you do that, it will let you decide what else you want them to see. So if I go in here to settings and I say restrict student result view. So I have to turn this on, otherwise students are going to just immediately see the answers. I want to restrict that for security. I have to check show items in order to make this stuff appear. And then I can say, do I want to show, so this is just going to show the questions themselves, but not how the student answered. I can say show feedback if I want to. So this is going to show, you know, the feedback that I wrote for the student, whether they got the question right or wrong or just in general. If I say show student response, that's going to show how the student answered, but no more, no less. If I say indicate response as correct or incorrect, then it's going to show you answered question 1 with A and that was wrong. You answered question 1 with A and that was right. If they got it wrong, it's not going to tell them the correct answer. If they got it right, then obviously it is going to tell them the correct answer. And then down here we have show correct answer. So if whether they got it right or wrong, it's going to show them what the right answer was. These are good for learning activities as opposed to true assessments. Or maybe this is something you want to open up during class, for example, so you can sort of have everyone say, okay, I'm going to open up the test, go review your answers, go see what you got wrong, and we're going to do this together during class time or something like that. That's another option. Proctoring, so I'm not going to show you how to use a Respondus lockdown browser. We have a nice handy YouTube video that explains how to do that. It does work better with new quizzes than it did with old quizzes. So I'm gonna, when I send you this PowerPoint, I'm gonna put the link in here and you can watch this video about how to set it up. Students can now download and launch Respondus right from within new quizzes, which is really nice. So they'll see this, you know, make sure you have the latest version. They can click on here and get the download, and then they'll get this little pop-up from Chrome that'll prompt them to open Respondus Lockdown Browser. Please note that Respondus does not work with Chromebooks, and that can be huge, especially for students coming from K through 12. There really is not a way around that. Chromebooks are limited in terms of what they can do. They don't have the full capabilities of a laptop. So that includes being able to download Respondus Lockdown Browser. So please make sure that if you're using Respondus, you tell students right up front, you know, at the beginning of class, that they need to have access to a desktop PC, a Mac, a laptop, or an iPad if you choose to allow iPads for taking tests. Migrating, I'm not going to cover how to do this, but basically what you can do is you can come to the quizzes page and you can use these 3 dots, and this is to take an old quiz and turn it into a new quiz. So basically you just have to click this migrate option. It's really quick and easy. There will be a few changes. Pretty much everything will come over, no matter which question types you choose, but a few different question types may change in the process of being migrated from old quizzes to new quizzes. And when you do this, you will get a copy. So you can see I have my old quiz to be migrated, and then I have the new quizzes version of that same quiz. So then I would just need to either delete or hide the old quiz and then use the new quiz. But make sure that you double check this new quiz before you go and delete the old one, because something, you know, you may want to keep using the old quiz for now, or you may need to make changes. Quizzes are going to migrate into a new assignment group, so make sure that you reorganize your assignment groups after you're done migrating. If you migrate a quiz twice, you'll get 2 separate new quizzes. So I can't migrate an old quiz, make some changes to the old quiz, migrate it again. I'm going to get duplicates if I do it that way. So it's not going to just automatically update the one that I already migrated, for example. Always check your assessments after you've done the migration, just because, like I said, some of the questions are going to change. Text only is really the only thing that just does not work in new quizzes. So text only was not a question type. It was really just literally just text. So you could put additional instructions or additional images or whatever in your old quizzes, but that is not an option in new quizzes. It's going to come over as a stimulus question, but unless you attach an actual quiz question to it, it won't be visible to students. If you preview it, you'll see that it just disappears. So text only is not going to work in new quizzes if that's something that you have in your old quizzes. Surveys are also not a thing that exist in new quizzes. It will come over as a standard quiz, and then just make sure to give it a score of 0 if you want it to be ungraded. I have not tried using a new quiz as a survey. I was not a huge fan of using old quizzes for a survey either. I tend to prefer something like Google Forms for surveys. But there is a great video that David made in our YouTube channel for how to use Google Forms as surveys. Fill in the blank is going to, sorry, I'm working from bottom to top for some reason, but fill in the blank is going to cover your multiple dropdown, your fill in the blank, and your fill in multiple blanks are all going to become fill in the blank because it allows you to use all 3 of those in new quizzes. We're not going to talk about migrating item banks, mostly because Canvas might improve how this works between now and July. So, like I said, if you're worried about it and you need help with that right now, let us know. But otherwise, I would either just start with new quizzes instead of old quizzes, or come July, we'll probably have some additional options for migrating your question banks. I've got some tips and tricks on this slide for how to do some editing, how to do some moving your questions around. I've included information about the navigation toolbar that I mentioned earlier. And that is it. I'm going to try putting just a random tip inside of my workshops. We'll see if I can keep that up, if I have time to update them. So if you want to see new tips, come to live workshops, and I'll just include something on the final slide. We will have Q&A. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
As far as grading goes for anything like this, if I had a quiz that was made up of, say, multiple choice questions, but then I had, say, an essay question in there, how does the grading end on my end look for something like that? Can I annotate their short answers, or how does that work?
Good question. So yes, not all of your questions can be auto-graded. Obviously, some things need to be graded by a human, like essay, like you mentioned. If you have things that need to be manually graded, you will see this little icon in your gradebook. And then you can use SpeedGrader the same way that you would use to grade an assignment to open up the quiz, and then you can manually grade things that need to be graded.
There's a list of types of quizzes, and I want to see what happens if you get the formulas.
So I'm going to hit the plus sign, and I'm going to choose formula. And the benefit of formula is basically that it allows you to randomize, do like a math problem and randomize the numbers without having to create a bunch of random questions in the item bank. It will randomize the numbers for you so that students are not getting the same number problem. So I'm going to do formula. This is a little bit confusing, but we'll step through it. So question stem is where we're going to put in the equation that we want students to use. And we're going to insert variables like X and Y where we want the random numbers to be replaced. And we're going to use these little backticks, backwards apostrophes, I guess, to tell Canvas, please put a random number here. So I'm going to type in my formula, and I'm just going to keep it real simple and say, what is x plus y? But my variables, I have to put those backticks around. So that is at the top left of my keyboard, right by the number 1. And notice that it recognized that and it plopped it down here. So we're going to set up those settings in a minute. So x is one of my random numbers and y is another one of my random numbers. So these are going to have actual numbers when the students take the test. So now I need to tell Canvas what numbers do I want to give my students. Now, depending on, for x plus y, maybe you're trying to do like, between 2,000 and
3,000.
6,000. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
So this is going to give the range of numbers that you will allow for each of these variables. So maybe I want y to be much lower, and I'm going to say between 1 and 10. You can also supply decimals if you wish. Formula definition. This is basically going to be exactly the same as this up here, except you don't need to use the backticks anymore. So this is where you're going to tell Canvas, whatever x and y are, do this. Do this to it. So I'm going to say x plus y. So it's pretty much the same as up here, just without the backticks.
Okay.
Generate possible solutions. So Canvas is not going to generate, so this is a pretty wide range, 2,000 to 6,000, 1 through 10. We could multiply that out and see how many possible random answers students might get. That would be a little bit excessive. So here we're going to say, actually, we're not going to do, 4,000 times, whatever different possible answers. We're going to generate a certain number of possible solutions right now. So we could say 200. I'm just going to say, for the sake of demonstration, 50. Again,
the number of students that are taking the quiz?
Sorry?
The number of solutions would be the number of students taking the quiz, right?
Not necessarily, because you might let the student take the quiz more than once, and you might, more than 50 answers doesn't mean that 50 students are all going to get different things. It's going to be random. So you could say 50, 200, 1,000, whatever you want to do. Let's see. So you can decide if you want to use decimals. Margin type is like how much margin of error you'll accept in your students' answers. So in some cases, there might be reasons to accept a certain margin of error, either by percent or an absolute margin of error.
Okay.
And then I'm going to say generate. And then this is where you can test to see if you did everything above correctly. So if I did everything correctly with a variable of x is this and y is this, this is what Canvas is telling me is the correct answer. So if I did it correctly, I can do the math myself and see, check what Canvas is giving me and did I get the right result. So in this case, yes, 5,770 plus 8 is 5,778. I did everything correctly. And so these are the actual answers that you can expect to get from your students on the test as well. You can allow them to have a calculator. It's really the only option here. I'm going to hit done. And then when students get this question, they're just going to get a simple, you can see an example here, what's 5,874 plus 6, and this is what it's going to look like to the student.
All right, thank you.